Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, and it's time for the next Deep Purple video where today we've made it all the way up to Mark 8. So, yeah, this is the lineup that I think everyone expected to be the final lineup of the band, although recent history has shown that's not the case. Mark 8 does consist of Steve Morris on lead guitar, Ian Gillan on vocals, Roger Glover on bass, Ian Pace on drums, and the newcomer Don Airey on organ and keyboards, replacing John Lord. So I feel I should backtrack a little bit. The last video, there's one detail from Mark 7 that I forgot to mention during the Abandon tour, and this kind of ties in with Don Airey coming in to take John Lord's place, so I think that's all well and good and fair enough. So I believe I think it's 2000, maybe it's 2001, but they actually they brought the Concerto for Groove and Orchestra back, and they did an orchestral tour. And I thought that was a really great send off for John Lord. Obviously, the concerto is his grand contribution to Deep Purple history, and the fact that they did that series of concerts, I thought was pretty cool, really. So it was with John Lord's departure, it was really, I don't think it was really a shock to any of the fans. I think he announced his desire to retire fairly early on, and he didn't leave the band in a blaze of glory like Ritchie Blackmore did, but they went and they did a final tour. His final shows were supposed to be in February of 2002. However, at that point, I guess the band got sick, just being on the road as much as they are and at their age as well. So the last few dates of what was supposed to be John Lord's final tour got canceled, but then later on in the year, September of '02, they did the series of concerts where they had both Don Airey and John Lord kind of trading back and forth, which is a really cool send-off. There's a really cool clip from those concerts where Don Airey would be doing his big keyboard showcase, and then the lights all go black, and when they come back on, there's John Lord, and he does his little solo and performs a grand intro to the Perfect Strangers tune. So that kind of wraps up John Lord's time in the band. And not to take any respect from John Lord, obviously he's a legend and he's such an integral part of the Deep Purple story, but I don't think there was the same level of concern amongst the fans as to whether or not the band could continue. Obviously, when Blackmore left, things were kind of shaky, and it was this, that, the other thing. Like, are we going to be able to do this? But after Steve Morris comes into the band and they're able to continue touring and recording, when John Lord amicably departs, I think the hardcore fans were obviously supportive of John's decision, and they were certainly welcoming of Don Airey. So yeah, and speaking of Don Airey, he's a fantastic keyboardist, obviously. Perfect fit for Deep Purple. He's got a very, very long history working with a wide range of famous rock people. You got Ozzy comes to mind, obviously. He was in Rainbow for a little bit, and Ritchie Blackmore even said famously that Don Airey was the closest person he could ever get to reaching John Lord's level. So it's only right that Airey comes in to replace John. And this becomes the longest lasting lineup of Deep Purple in the entire history of the band, really. Certainly not the most prolific. The recording habits were not quite as intense as other lineups, but they certainly toured an awful lot. And, really right up until just a couple of years ago, this band was still intact. So for this video, we've got two albums to talk about. That is Bananas. Fairly controversial record. I think this is not one that ranks too highly amongst Deep Purple fans. We'll talk a bit about that, obviously. And the other album I'm going to talk about in this video is Rapture of the Deep, which is an interesting album as well. So yeah, this period of the band, it should be at least in my own history of listening to Deep Purple, this was the current stuff when I first got into the band. In fact, when I was first going to record stores, as I was like 12, 13 years old, my dad would take me to the store and I'd look for CDs. And of course, with Deep Purple, you always got your Machine Heads, your In Rocks. Burn was always around, loads of compilations and live albums and whatnot. But the first time I saw Bananas, I was kind of perplexed by it. The album cover is so strange, and um, yeah, I remember it. Looking at it, thinking like, is this Deep Purple? It says Deep Purple on it, but yeah, I think I'm pretty sure I would have bought it too. So in terms of like collecting the stuff chronologically, it kind of comes in at a weird time. But I'm not diving into the actual album reviews just yet. But that's kind of a funny anecdote about bananas there for you. But this period of the band, so we'll kind of get right into it. The period, immediately after John Lord leaves in the early 2000s, you know, um, you can't deny that the band's getting older at this point, right? And they run into that classic problem so many, older rock bands do, where, obviously they want to keep recording, they want to keep creating, but they have to find that certain balance, right? Obviously they want to create something that's new and has enough vitality to be, exciting, but they also have to cater to their classic audience, right? And I mean, in many cases, the core audience isn't always favorable of too many, extreme changes. They want that classic sound intact, but at the same time, you don't, the band doesn't want to just keep, rehashing the same thing over and over and over again and getting into this sort of formulaic trap. And I think, in full disclosure, I think this period in the early 2000s, the early albums made by the Mark 8 band, they almost run that risk of just kind of repeating the sameness, right? It seems to be kind of difficult for them to find a certain amount of vitality. However, the story between these two albums, Bananas and Rapture of the Deep, you can see the direction that they ultimately would move towards, and it's more explicit on Rapture of the Deep. But they start applying a bit more of a progressive sort of edge, at least in terms of like the arrangement. So like some of the songs have some really complex middle sections. There's lots of cool like little tricks. There's a lot of odd time signatures. So I mean, ultimately, this pair of albums sort of determines the direction that they would take much later on in the 2010s, because there's a huge gap between Rapture of the Deep and Now What. But in any case, I think they managed to push through that rut that's so common with many bands, where they don't, they like I said, they're trying to find that balance of creating something new and vital while still retaining enough of the old sound to keep their core audience engaged. So, and that's just part of the story when you get into bands that have this huge back catalog, and there's so much expectation based on the legacy that they've left, but and they're also, they're not getting any younger. They're at that particular stage in life, right? But I think, on the whole, they did a pretty good job. And, as we get into the next video for like the second half of Mark 8, I think they come out pretty damn strong, actually. But for this period, like I said, this is where they're still kind of navigating the waters of being one of those older bands. So I guess we'll just dive right on into it. So the first album I'll talk about is Bananas. And I always have to say it like that because let's be honest, it's a strange title, it's a strange album cover. Everything about this album is very strange. But every time I think of the name of this album, I can't help but think of the Monty Python skit, the self-defense against fresh fruit, where John Cleese is demonstrating to his class how to defend yourself against an attacker who is armed with fruit. And the one scene where he announces the next fruit weapon, which is bananas. So every time I think of this album, all I hear is John Cleese's voice saying bananas. So there you go. So yeah, like I said, this is the first thing they do with Don Airey. It's released in 2003. Comes out, it's about maybe 5 years after the Abandon album, and they do seem to be taking a certain shift in style here. Whereas Abandon, they've largely abandoned the that really heavy style that's on that album. I think that album lacks a certain amount of diversity, and this album brings back the diversity, fairly successfully, but it doesn't have the same energy or excitement than Perpendicular has. Like it almost sounds like they're trying to do like another sort of a Perpendicular, where they're doing a little bit of this style, a little bit of that style, all with that kind of core of the hard rock Deep Purple sound. But I always felt this one doesn't quite come across as well as Perpendicular. There is lots of good material on here, like but there's a huge range. Like the good stuff is quite good, but the weaker stuff, I'll be totally honest, I find it pretty bland, to be honest. So the end result, I think, is something fairly patchy. But nonetheless, it is like I keep saying in these videos, it's a part of the story, and I think it's a decent album. I think it gets a little bit too much flack amongst the hardcore Deep Purple community, but it's for what it is. I still think it's all right. One notable thing about this, obviously, is the introduction of a producer. They got a guy named Michael Bradford, who had a history of producing a lot of hip hop artists. I think he did Kid Rock. Like he produced all kinds of different artists. But I think amongst the Deep Purple fan base, there was a concern like, oh, what are you doing getting this like hip hop guy in? Like, what's he gonna do? And I think for the most part, Bradford does a pretty good job of maintaining the Deep Purple sound. For the two albums we're talking about, I think this has a better sound than Rapture of the Deep, but they're both still pretty decent. But he certainly doesn't try to, you know, impose his influence on the songs. I think he is pretty good about just letting the band do their thing. He probably has the odd suggestion here and there. He does get a couple of co-writing credits, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, like I said, on the whole, it's an all right album. It's not the best, but I don't think it's the worst either. I mean, I think this has got overall, I'd say it's got a higher quantity of high quality songs than say Slaves and Masters, for example. But yeah, we'll talk about the album cover. One of the strangest album covers released by any hard rock band. Again, kind of going back to when I was a kid and I was just discovering Deep Purple, and I'm kind of looking to scrounge up all the classic material, and then I keep seeing this record in the shelves, and I'm just like, what is this? At that point, I don't think I had any knowledge of the fact that Ritchie Blackmore isn't in the band. I wasn't even sure if at the time, I may not have been aware that Deep Purple was still an active band at the time, but I remember like looking at it, oh yeah, it says Deep Purple, and I would have got the album pretty early on, and there's Steve Morris on guitar. This is the first time I'd ever heard or seen of Steve Morris, and there's Don Airey, and of course as a young fan who's getting into the older stuff, it's like, well, where's John Lord and where's Ritchie Blackmore, but listening to it now in context with the entire story. It's certainly not quite as shocking. The album cover is probably just as shocking. I mean, just these two guys with sitting on a pile of bananas and all these pictures of workers and fruit markets and train stations and stuff like that. It is a bizarre cover, but I think it shows their sense of humor pretty well. It probably should be notable. I mean, like, this is the first album that has none of the real core members that started it. I mean, obviously Ian Pace has been in the band since the very beginning, but as you recall, you go right back to 1967, when Chris Curtis wanted to put this Roundabout band together. After Chris Curtis went crazy, the record company, they were most interested in Blackmore and Lord. They were really the core of the band. So, it's interesting in that sense. And then even more interesting is the fact that Ian Pace, the drummer, ends up being the only guy that has survived all of these lineup changes. So in a weird way, he almost fulfills the prophecy of Chris Curtis and this Roundabout plan, where originally it was like there's supposed to be a core lineup, and then rotating musicians would go around them, and the way that it ended up is that there's Ian Pace and all the musicians go around him. But I always thought that was kind of funny, and like I said, he's fulfilling that prophecy in some strange way. But we'll dive into the songs here. So opens with a song called "House of Pain," and this is one that I was saying that some of the songs are like really really strong, and some of them are like non-typically bland for Deep Purple, and I find House of Pain is one of the more bland songs, which is very uncharacteristic because traditionally Deep Purple would open their albums with like a real barnstormer that really gets your attention, it really hits you in the face. I've always felt House of Pain it falls short just a little tiny bit. It's got decent enough riff and everything. We get one of the late era Gillan screams there. Which it's never going to be as good as it was, obviously, but I mean he's still doing it, so that's certainly cool. But like I said, the song itself, the actual, the verse and the chorus never really did that much for me. The riff is kind of okay. I do like the solo section. The solo section is really nice in that we have that, that back and forth between the keyboard and guitar, although this time fulfilled entirely by the new guys. The soloists in this version of the band are all relatively new, right? So we get a great little showcase for Don Airey, and of course Steve Morris, every guitar solo he does is gold. So the solo section is really good, but on the whole, I've always found House of Pain to be a bit of a slow start to the album, but it does pick up. The next song, I have to find it here because the track listing is all jumbled on the CD for some odd reason. The second track on the album is "Sun Goes Down." This one I like quite a bit. This kind of harkens back to the Abandon era, in that it's big heavy riff. There's some cool backing vocals, quite haunting with that "Sun Goes Down." I think that works really well. But yeah, it's all about the riff. It's big, heavy, crunching riff. And the song isn't that long, really. It doesn't overstay its welcome by any means. But yeah, good stuff. A great showcase for Don Airey as well. Again, like kind of going back to what the Mark VII lineup reestablished is that. This is no longer a guitar band. Deep Purple was, a guitar-oriented band really between 1984 and 1993, and then after that, they start to bring that organ back quite a bit. And I think that's one, saving grace of this album is that that balance between the organ and the guitar. I think they do a really good job there, and "Sun Goes Down" is a good example of that. The third track on the album is a song called "Haunted." So this is them doing that ballad thing again. There's I feel there's songs on Abandon that are trying to be ballads, but they don't quite make it because the heaviness overtakes that. I'm thinking "Fingers to the Bone" in particular. And then, of course, there's a couple of ballads on Perpendicular, both of which are really good. I'll be totally honest, I was never fully sold on Haunted, and I think that's controversial. I think there's a lot of people, even the people that don't like this album that much, seem to point to Haunted as being one of the better tracks. There's nothing wrong with it. It's very pleasant. Again, is it the sort of thing that we want to hear from Deep Purple, though? That's the big question. There's a string arrangement on it, which is very nice. That's certainly never a bad thing. I think Gillan does a really good job on the vocals, but I mean, you can really tell, you can really hear, the many years of strain that he put on his voice over, the amount of touring that the guy did. But I think Haunted is a very good example of, Ian singing very well with his, fully matured voice. It's never going to have that really rich tone that you get on the concerto or the, some of the really early Deep Purple recordings he did. But, it still sounds good. He's still very emotive. He still, delivers it quite well. There's a female backing vocalist. I could probably look up her name. I don't have it off the top of my head, but let's see if I can find it without wasting too much time here. We got this big foldable thing with all the pictures of the band. You can look at the pictures of the band while I try and find this this little detail here. Oh, there it is. Should have just looked at that. Beth Hart. Beth Hart does the backing vocals on Haunted. And again, I think she does a good job. I mean, objectively, like as like a performance of a piece of music, like there's nothing wrong with it. My only skepticism is like should this have been like an Ian Gillan solo thing, or is Deep Purple into doing ballads now? I mean, who knows, right? I think they did better ballads than Haunted, but for all intents and purposes, it's all right. So track 4 of the album, we get Razzle Dazzle. This is another one that's kind of okay. Again, not one of the stronger things on the album, but I think it's okay. First time I heard it when I was again like 12 or 13 years old, whenever it was when I first got this album, I really loved the guitar riff. The older I've gotten, the less convinced I am of it. It's certainly no. I mean, it's not Burn, is it? It's not, or even compared to like Morse riffs. I mean, it's not as good as something like Somebody Stole My Guitar or something like that. It's a little bit gimmicky. There's probably an element of commerciality to it. Does have a nice bridge section though. I like how the bridge kind of like draws everything right back and it kind of builds back up. One thing that I think saves the song, I think Gillan does put together some really great lyrics here. There's some funny words on Razzle Dazzle. I really like the during the bridge. I've been thinking about thinking, and I'm thinking it's improving. For some reason, that's always given me a laugh. So, I don't know if I would consider Razzle Dazzle to be like a filler track by any means, because there are elements of it that I think are really well put together. But on the whole, it's okay. Not a great song, but decent enough. So in all honesty, I mean, for apart from Sun Goes Down, I've always found it the whole album has a bit of a slow start. But by the time we get to track 5, we get Silver Tongue. This is a great song. This might be one of my favorites on the album. Probably either top two favorite songs on the album for sure. I think this is fantastic. A really good heavy groove. I just love that. Good heavy guitar riff, nice and crunchy. Don Airy adds some like really cool little like a little electronic, almost sounds like little glitches on the song during that riff, which I think are really effective. The guitar melody is really cool. I think Gillan puts out a really good vocal performance on this one as well. We get a little taste of that progginess during the middle section as well, where they go into that doodle 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 doodle. They kind of do that to again bounce the solos back and forth between Morris and Airy. Yeah, I think it's a great song. I've always been a big fan of Silver Tongue. The chorus is really really intense. I just thought use my silver tongue. Back into that riff. Really good stuff. The one time that I saw Deep Purple, I saw them, would have been on the end of the Bananas tour. It was in 2005, just before the release of Rapture of the Deep, but they opened with Silver Tongue, and I remember I was pumped because, I had heard the song, I knew they were playing new stuff, I thought, oh wow, this is really cool. It was a great concert opener, and it's a shame this one, again, it's another one that I think should have stayed in the sets, but, after, when Rapture of the Deep comes out, they more or less, just, abandon it completely for the most part, which is a shame, because I think this is another, later era classic in my mind, but is what it is. So then we get to track 6, let me find it here, it is Walk On. So here, this is one of the longer pieces on the album. Producer Michael Bradford actually does play rhythm guitar on this, so he does kind of like the basic bluesy thing. And again, it's another song that I find is kind of okay at best. This is far from being like a classic. If it was a little bit shorter, I'd probably have a little bit more, patience for it. The chorus is okay. The chorus has there's kind of like this. What the first words that come to mind are like hopeful struggle. It's like you're climbing up a hilltop, but there's always hope. Kind of, that's the what those chords in the chorus evoke for me anyway. And Morris is largely doing kind of like little guitar fills to accentuate Bradford's rhythm guitar. This is another one that Michael Bradford co-wrote. I think he co-wrote House of Pain as well. But yeah, on the whole, Walk On is it gets a little samey after a while. I'm not as big a fan of that slower blues style. Like I think they were much better at doing that bluesy thing on Abandon with Don't Make Me Happy. I think that one works a little bit better. But one thing I really like about Walk On, and this is not meant to be like a snarky comment or anything like that. I'm just gonna adjust the camera here just in case I'm out of focus. Sorry, I'm distracted by my own camera here. One thing I do like about Walk On, and it's not meant to sound like an insult or anything like that, but I really like the outro. I like when the song ends. I think it has that really long, sort of ethereal, atmospheric soundscape going on. I think that's really, really good, actually. And again, like those kind of soundscapey things are something that the band would further embrace, a little further on down the road. So that's certainly an element that I've always appreciated. But the song as a whole, I'm not too sold on myself. But That's okay. The next song I think is fantastic as well, and I think the transition between these two songs works when you get out of that long, quiet, ethereal intro from Walk On, and then you get the guitar intro to Picture of Innocence. Um, I love Morris's little lick there, that little bluesy kind of lick, and then Pacey's snare drum kicks in. We kind of get into a cool little shuffle and a menacing, still kind of a bluesy riff, but it's not like the blues that's on Walk On, but that boom 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 ba-dum bum 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 dum ba-dum bum bum bum. I think that works really really well. This was actually co-written with John Lord, as a matter of fact. This is Lord was still in the band when they were putting this one together, so that's kind of cool. I really like the lyrics on this one. It's not that they're particularly, there's some humorous parts in the lyrics, obviously, but they've always just resonated with me quite well. I certainly relate to where Ian Gillan's coming from on this one. I think there's a certain amount of political influence on it, but he's not being political in the sense that we talk today, where it's like someone picks a side and you have to be on that side, and anyone that's on the opposing side is the bad person. I think he's more specifically talking about just the nature of governments and power and whatnot. But I think the lyrics are really, really cool. Great chorus. I like the pre-chorus and the chorus. I think are really, really good. I like the big wind up, that boom, dom, 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 dun, dun, dun. And that's a funny lyric. There goes my mannish boyhood. That was always a line that gave me a bit of a chuckle. And then the actual chorus is a good, heavy, crunchy riff. No drinks, no smokes, no dicking around, no dirty jokes. It's a great song. One of my favorites on the album. Not one of my. This would be more of a top three rather than a top two, but I think it's still really really good. I think like I said before, like the way that the album kind of flows together, I think Picture of Innocence does a really good job there. So what is the next track on the album? It would be I Got Your Number. This one I think is very, very strong, and this is the biggest indicator of that kind of proggy direction that they start to head in. It's not super explicit on this album, but I Got Your Number is the song that really demonstrates that. Got a really wacky intro. I believe it's in 6/8, but it's in a really twisted 6/8. Let me just, is it 6 or 9? Do 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 bum. It's in a funny time signature. You can't count it in one, but the bars overlap, and you have to kind of like modulate where the one lands. But I think if you count it in threes, it does kind of line up. But I think it's a really cool intro, and again, like the way that the drums kind of stutter to catch the one of those threes, I think it works really really well. And then we get into a really classic later Purple Era riff. I love that. Really good, really catchy, strong chorus, and then the middle section is where things get really, really interesting. It kind of goes into a bit of a, the first part of the bridge is a little bit more quiet, a little bit more dynamic, and then we get into that whole da 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 don, ba ba bum da 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 don, da da da, and it goes into this whole completely different section, and it's, probably some of the proggiest stuff they had done up to this point, really. This is another one that they played live when I saw them in 2005, which was really cool. I was happy to see that. This one got a lot of live renditions during the Bananas tour, actually. I think this is one they enjoyed playing, which is interesting because I would imagine it's probably one of the trickiest ones to play. But I'm glad they were up for the challenge in any case, because it is a great song and another contender for one of my favorites on the album. So that's probably my top three right there, as it would be Silver Tongue, Picture of Innocence, and I Got Your Number. I think those are certainly the three strongest tracks on here. So then, what comes next? Next is Never a Word. So this is the second ballad on the album. And very interesting structure, actually. I think that this is another one that I think is quite pretty. It's quite nice. And a huge instrumental intro. It's about like 2 minutes before the lyrics actually kick in, and I think that's a good thing. There's some orchestral stuff on there as well, but it's just a very pleasant and pretty and like kind of a tranquil melody that we have there, and I think it's quite nice. When the lyrics come in, I think it's quite pleasant as well. And again, I'm kind of eating my words here, right? Like I say, like, oh, is Haunted the kind of thing that we want on a Deep Purple album? Well, never a word is the same case. Like, I don't know, yeah, it's not the sort of thing you'd expect on a Deep Purple album, but um, at least in the context of the album, I think it does work really well. I do like the quiet intro after all the heaviness of "I Got Your Number," kind of resets the batteries, gives you some breathing space, and it's a pleasant little song actually. I think I prefer this one quite a bit more to "Haunted," um, and yeah, so it's a very good song. And then we move on to the title track, "Bananas," another funny time signature. This is in seven. This one, and this one is another great one. I mean, I'm not sure if I like it as much as like the three that I mentioned before, but I like that it's in the funny time signature. This one's in seven. The lyrics are really, really funny. I think there's a lot of goofy stuff in there. Now my love is richer than rich because I studied mathematics, and we're all invited to tea with Alice or whatever. Like I think that's all quite good fun and a lot of good humor in it. Everyone has gone bananas, and then almost the opposite of "Never a Word," where we get like all of the verses and the choruses are all like crammed up at the front, and then we go into this really cool instrumental section as well, and we get some great solos between Morse and Don Airy. And I think it's really, really good. Going back to like the first half of the song, I really like. It almost has like this kind of like surf rock feel of it for a little while, where when Gillan's singing that dun and then the guitar, I think that's really, really cool. And yeah, like I said, great instrumental section. Yeah, great track. And again, there's like those little traces of that progginess. It's not fully, they haven't fully embraced it yet, but you can see that they're playing with it. They're dipping their toes in the water. And that's, again, for a band at this stage where they're balancing vitality with, the classic sound, it's nice to see them throwing in those little experiments, right? So, yeah, "Bananas," the title track, is a great song. And then we move on to the next track. Maybe track 10 or 11. No, it'd be track 9 actually. It looks like there's oh no, this is track 11. My brain. I said math. I did not study mathematics, and my life is not richer than rich. But give it time. I'm still young. So yeah, the final song per se is "Doing It Tonight." This is another one that I quite enjoy, honestly. Like unusually, I find most of the best songs on this album are on the second half of it. But "Doing It Tonight" is really cool. This is another one, it doesn't sound anything like Jack Ruby from Abandon, but it's another one where they're kind of, bringing in kind of Latin influences and some like island influences and applying that to the established Heavy Purple sound. I think that does really good. I think it's a great chord sequence and a great melody. It's just got a really nice flow. Dun 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 dun. It's got a good flow. Therefore I imagine we'll be doing it tonight. It's got that infectious groove, that Latin feel. Which actually it very much fits the theme of the album cover actually. I imagine this is these folks are hanging out in a very tropical environment. So whether it's Latin or Caribbean or whatever, I mean, who's to say? But I don't think that's Caribbean by any means. But yeah, I think "Doing It Tonight's" a really cool song. Great way to close out the songs of the album. And yeah, again, like I said, it seems like the best stuff is very much packed towards the second half, which is unusual, but that's still cool. It's nothing wrong with doing something a little differently, right? So doing it tonight gets a thumbs up from me. And then the last song on the album this is kind of a difficult one to talk about, really, because this is a tribute to the victims of the Columbia disaster. Obviously the shuttle broke up in the sky in early 2003. I remember that event quite well. I remember that being all over the news. I don't watch the news anymore, but when I was a kid, I watched it a little bit. But the pilots of the Columbia or the crew on the Columbia were very much Deep Purple fans, and I think they actually met them a few times. Like they watched a few launches, and I think they had they had a relationship with them. So then obviously it would have hit the band really hard when the disaster happened and those lives were lost. So Morris put together this really touching and emotive instrumental. I'm pretty sure it's just Morris playing everything on here. I think there's, it is decently well orchestrated. There's some acoustic guitar in the back, but it's very much that lead guitar melody that really pulls at the heartstrings. And I think it's a like I said, very emotive, very evocative, powerful little piece. It's only about a minute and a half long, but yeah, it's a beautiful song, really, and it's a very touching tribute to people who lost their lives in a very tragic event. And this one I got a lot of live airplay as well. I think this is the only one that survived the set lists after the Bananas tour. I'm pretty sure they played Contact Lost every gig when Morris was in the band. I'm quite certain, anyway. It stayed in the set for a long time, which again is appropriate given the story behind the song and whatnot. And yeah, it's a beautiful song and kind of a very somber way to end an otherwise pretty bouncy and fun album. But there you go. That's Bananas. Just to bring some Monty Python influence to bring a little levity to the dark ending, or I shouldn't say dark ending, the sad ending to the album. But yeah, there it is, a controversial album, but I still think for all intents and purposes it's a decent album. I don't think it's the worst in their catalog. I think people give it a bit of an unfair shake, but there you go. I'm glad to have it. And actually, if I won't get up and get it, but I lied. I do have one more Deep Purple album on vinyl. I actually do have Bananas on vinyl. I can't remember when I would have got that, but I understand it's kind of hard to get, hard to come by these days. So yeah, I'll be keeping that one in good shape for sure. Anyway, so Bananas comes out in 2003. I failed to remember the exact month, but can't have everything right. I'm delivering the core content. I hope that's going to be enough. But 2005 comes along. This one I do remember. This came out, I think it was like November of 05. October in Europe and November in North America. But we get Rapture of the Deep. Pretty quick follow-up. Again, there's a 5-year gap between Abandon and Bananas. Only 2 years between Bananas and Rapture of the Deep. So yeah, you can tell that they're very keen to establish the new lineup with Don Airey. I think this album works considerably better than Bananas. Whereas Bananas has like strong moments and there's a lot of patchiness in between. This album I think is still patchy. There's still songs on it that are like kind of meh, but there's a greater quantity of strong songs, and the strong songs on here are actually very strong. To the point where I wonder. As a total listening experience, this one might beat out Abandon. I love a lot of the songs on Abandon, but as I mentioned in that video, I find it's a little bit grating on the ear because it's very long and it's very heavy. You don't really have that. You don't really have any breaks between the heaviness. This one does give you a couple of breaks. There's a lot of heavy stuff on here, but there's a lot of experimental stuff on here as well. And that proggy influence that is kind of hinted at Bananas is a little bit more explicit on here. They do eventually take that a little bit farther when they finally get around to making the follow-up to this 7 years later. But on the whole, I think this is an improvement, and I think Don Airey actually gets a little bit more attention on this album as well, which I think is pretty cool. I remember this is the first album that came out when I was a fan. This is the first album that I knew was coming out. I was excited to get it. And I remember when I got it, and I was like, "Oh, this is the best album ever!" Da, 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 da. I don't think that now. Like I said, I think it is a pretty strong album given the context of where they are in their career at this point. But like I said, probably, listening to it in preparation for this, I thought this might be a bit better than Abandoned, which I was kind of surprised by. But nonetheless, it is here and it is an album. And then it's funny because but by the time Now What comes out, in 2013, that was when I was at the peak of my playing. So I was playing lots of gigs, and I was really busy. I wasn't listening quite as much, and I remember hearing that Now What came out, but I just wasn't engaged, and it wasn't until much later. I think it was when Infinite comes out that I decided, okay, I better get Now What, and then it kind of reinvigorated my Deep Purple passion, so to speak. But I remember when this one came out very, very well, because I was probably at the peak of my childhood fandom of the band. So this was a big moment when Rapture the Deep came out. It's got a pretty cool album cover. I think it might seem a little bit dated to that mid 2000s thing. I mean, I think I've seen people on forums comment on how the font looks like it could have been taken out of something from Photoshop at the time. That's probably the case. I mean, they try to be a little tricky with the backwards E, and there's obviously a theme of reflection on the album cover. I think the actual picture of the album on the album is really, really cool. How you get man looking down at his reflection, and he's squiggly here, but the trees are straight, and everything's kind of topsy turvy. I think there's got to be some sort of interesting theme there that they're trying to go for. And it kind of ties in with where Gillan was at the time, because Gillan he was in a real sort of spiritualistic sort of a vibe at this time. And he talks about all kinds of cosmic things and religious things, and he's I think he's toned down from that a little bit now, or maybe not. I don't know. But I remember specifically when I was a kid listening to this, I was like, wow, like Gillan's getting very trippy. We get kind of a nice close up of the cool album cover there with Squiggly Man and squiggly trees. And I thought that was kind of a cool concept as well, is again, like this concept of like inverting things, and you got to flip the booklet over, so the second half of the album, the lyrics are all backwards like that. I thought that was kind of a cool little trick. So yeah, I should say as well, this is the second album that is produced by Michael Bradford, and a lot of people have give him crap for like the sound quality on this. I think the production on this is pretty decent. I mean, it's certainly better than like In Rock, for example. But In Rock's music transcends the production. I didn't spend too much time ranting about the production on In Rock because the music is so damn good. But the one complaint I have on the production of this is the drum sound is very frustrating. It's extremely dry. Any time where you hear Pacey just playing on his own, like the snare drum just sounds like that's the snare sound on the album, and it drives me crazy because Pacey has had some fantastic snare sounds in the past. In the not too distant past from this as well, like in Abandon, like the sound of the drums on Any Fool Know That is so good. Like where's that crackling snare from that? It's all gone for whatever reason, but it just sounds kind of dead and lifeless on here. But other than that, the rest of the instruments sound good. But as a drummer, I'm always listening for those drums, and I was even when I was young and super excited about it, I think I noticed it but wasn't willing to admit it to myself because I was just so excited about it. There's a new Deep Purple album, and I'm here witnessing history. Blah 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 blah. As you do when you're I would have been just turned 15 at the time. So anyway, we'll dive into the tracks then, shall we? So the album opens with a song called Money Talks. Really like the intro to this. This is a great. It's a shame that Bananas didn't have an intro like this, because it's a great showcase for Don Airey. The first minute is all his. We got all these kind of cool, spacey, sound effects, almost reminiscent of the intro to And the Address, all the way back to Shades of Deep Purple, but with the organ intro, and then we kind of get that like weird little pulsating thing. There's some cool synthesizer sounds that get generated, and we get that menacing ascending chord sequence, and then kind of reaches that critical mass, and then boom into the main riff. And I think that works really, really well. The riff itself is fantastic. I love how long it is. It takes a few bars before the riff actually resolves itself and repeats, but I think that's really, really cool. Bow Ba-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. And there's cool like use of triplets in there. I think that's a very Morrissey sort of a riff. It's just long and extended, and it kind of meanders a little bit, but Gillan finds some great melodic ideas to go over top of that riff, which I think work really, really well. I was never fully sold on the chorus of this song, but at the end of the day, it's still not too bad. I like how it has a nice long extended bridge section. That whole money turns to money as it always returns. I think that works really, really well. I really like it. It's got a great guitar solo as well, but what I really like is after the guitar solo ends, the whole band kind of goes back to that intro with that ascending keyboard part, and I think that's a really good way to kind of build up and then go back into the main riff for the final verse there. Gillen's the melodic ideas are quite fun because there's a little bit of spoken word stuff in there, which I think is kind of funny. And again, he's just kind of rambling. It's weird. I mean, he's talking about money, but again, there's that kind of spiritual element that he's applying to it as well. How on one hand, money is it's an integral part of our society and how our culture operates, but it's also very corrupting, and it can we need it, but if you get too much of it, it can turn you into a shithead if you're not careful. But I think it's a great intro. I think it's and again, it's leaning towards those proggy influences again with the extended bridge and all that. I always thought it was a good way to open the album for sure. Never played live actually, which I always thought was kind of unusual because I always thought it was one of the stronger tracks on the album, but is what it is. We move on to track two, and we get "Girls Like That." This was always a kind of a funny song. I've never really known what to think of it. I don't think it's one of the stronger things on the album, but it is pleasant enough. I really like the intro, the soft little guitar intro, that I think that works really really well. When the main riff kicks in, though, I've always it kind of suffers from that razzle dazzle thing where it's like, it's a riff, it's decent, it's just not top tier. You know what I mean? Um, I think Gillan puts in a great vocal performance in it, though. I really like after the first chorus where he holds that note so well and just kind of goes, ah! He can't do the screams as consistently or as effectively as he used to, but he still does lots of funny things with his voice, and I think it fits the song really, really well. There's some funny plays on words here. You could say he's talking about girls like that, or some girls like that. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? There's a double meaning to the title, and I think that's one of Gillan's clever bits of wordplay there. But like I said, on the whole, it's an all right song. It's got bits of it that I like, but it's not one of the standout tracks for me. We move on to track three. We get what I would consider a stronger track on the album. We get "Wrong Man." Um, Big heavy riff, nice, really working that low E string. I think that's really really good. I like the verses, how it kind of breaks up, and Ari kind of like fills in the space for the verses. I think that works really well. Again, the choruses, just not all the choruses work for me on this one. I always felt the chorus, it was never quite as strong as the verse. It's got a decent little bridge section as well, but yeah, I think it's a pretty strong song on the album. I definitely like it better than "Girls Like That." Um, and this is one of those songs too. I mean, I mentioned how much I really like "Silver Tongue." I think there's a certain, it's in the same wheelhouse as "Silver Tongue," and maybe even parts of "What's Her Name." For some reason, I always, if I'm singing "What's Her Name," I end up singing "Wrong Man" or whatever. So I'm not sure why that is, but I think that there is a certain thread between those tracks. But yeah, maybe I'm totally off base. You never know. But yeah, "Wrong Man," good song for sure. Not as good as Money Talks, but certainly better than "Girls Like That." Good heavy riff. Yeah, I like how Ari does those kind of like high pitch, electronic sounds towards the end as well. That kind of like descending. Pew, 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 pew. I think that sounds kind of cool. It's a cool way to fade the song out. And yeah, then we move on to track four, which is the title track, "Rapture of the Deep." This one is very strong. I think this is possibly one of the best, if you're taking like single tracks out of these albums, this might be one of the best songs since the Perpendicular era, actually. I think "Rapture of the Deep" is very, very good. They're pretty much explicitly trying to do prog metal at this point. I don't know about prog metal, but it's certainly very proggy. They're playing with those Eastern scales, which I think gives it a very exotic flavor. There's also a certain epicness as well. I mean, it's almost kind of evoking the same vibe as the Perfect Strangers, the title track "Perfect Strangers." But this is much more elaborate, much more complex than Perfect Strangers. The arrangement, there's a lot more going on in this song, and I think it works really, really well. Lots of different parts to it. I love how many variations we get of that main riff, that ba-da 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 ba-da-dum, ba-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I think the way that that's arranged is parts of the song where they really elevate the intensity on a grand scale with moments like when Roger Glover starts playing the actual melody on the bass. I mean, it gets very, very intense, and they do that a couple of times, and it works really, really well. There's a part around the guitar solo that almost reminds me of Dream Theater, where Morris is doing that do 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 do. There's something about that evokes Dream Theater vibes for some reason. It was not as heavy or insane or as complex as Dream Theater, but I get those vibes for sure. Um, and yeah, I think the chorus is really strong. It's like the first chorus I really, really dig, but it's all right. This is Rapture of the Deep. It's not really a chorus. Like the lyrics are kind of always changing through the different parts. But yeah, very, very strong song. And, like I said, probably the strongest single song on a Deep Purple album since Perpendicular. So that's saying something, because Perpendicular is absolutely brilliant. But I like that it's showing the band moving forward. They're looking for something different, and this appears to be the way. This sort of slightly more proggy style. And yeah, I think it's really great. There's some great keyboard work on there as well. Great organ work by Don Airey, and yeah. Great song. Probably the best thing on the album. I would say. I think I don't think I'll take that back. So then we move on to track 5. We approach the halfway point of the album, and we get Clearly Quite Absurd. This is one of the ballads that we get, and I think this is probably the best ballad we've had since Sometimes I Feel Like Screaming. Um, if you consider that one a ballad. I mean, it does. Sometimes I feel like Screaming has elements of balladry, but Clearly Quite Absurd is much more in that quieter range. I mean, Screaming has its dynamic moments where it gets heavy and then back down, but clearly Quite Absurd does remain in a fairly mellow mindset for the entirety of the song. But I think it's very effective. I think the melody is really good. Gillan does a really good job on it, and I particularly love the those ascending parts where Morris is just doing those little arpeggios to very slowly go up. There's a very haunting quality to that. I think it's very effective. This is better than any of the ballads. Either of the two slow songs from Bananas, I think Clearly Quite Absurd knocks them both out of the park. Great song, actually. So then we move on to track 6, and we get Don't Let Go. This is another one. It's all right. This is kind of the same wheelhouse of Girls Like That. It's got there's decent parts to it, but it's not stellar by any means. It's pretty catchy. It's got that little hook, the main guitar line. There's some funny Gillan lyrics there. I mean, I love the "Don't Let Go of That Whiskey Bottle." I think that's pretty funny. A lot of good Morse stuff on here. There's always good Morse stuff, but I meant to say Airey stuff. I think Airey has a pretty good showcase on here. Particularly towards the end, he's doing like the electric piano thing. I think that sounds really, really good. But on the whole, I find this is one of those. If there is a filler song on the album, this was probably it. It's a little bit, it's a little bit too polite, a little bit too catchy. I hesitate to call it poppy because again, at this point, in the context of their careers and the context of what the music world was doing around them at this time, they know they're not going to get on the radio. And one of the bonus tracks on here kind of talks about that. I'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, I mean, maybe it's a little bit poppy, but it's a polite little song, and it kind of passes me by when I'm listening to the whole album. But like I said, probably the highlight of it is the electric piano solo towards the end by Don Airey. But yeah, there you go. Don't Let Go. Okay, not great. Move on to track 7. We get Back to Back. This is another one that I find is kind of okay. I think it's a step up from Don't Let Go. This is where I really hear that dry drum sound. Like the intro to back just drives me crazy because it's a great little groove, but you compare that to again the intro to Any Fool Know That, and it's like what happened to the sound of the drums? Like what's going on there? But there's some really cool riffing on here. I really like the Don Airey's playing with some wild synthesizers here. We get a really cool 80s vibe. It's almost like Ghostbusters kind of elements there. The song itself isn't particularly heavy, but I mean, like, yeah, again, like it's got a good groove, it's got a good riff. Lyrically, I think this is very funny as well. This is Gillan. I guess Gillan saw somewhere there was a study in England that was talking about how many times men think about sex or something like that a day, and he just kind of wrote this funny little this little detail about that whole article that he saw. One of the funniest lines is like, "Oh, it's." Well, let me just like find the proper lyric here because it's too good. Should be easy enough to find. There it is. I read in the news that the average man is uplifted 5 times a day. You can imagine what 5 times a day means. I'm confused. I have to confess, my feeling never goes away. I can't understand how the average man keeps losing his concentration. So funny. I mean, especially at his age at that point, be singing those singing lyrics like that at his age is but only Ian Gillan could do that and get away with it, right? He's got that sardonic nature, right? I really like the solo section on here. I particularly the big synthesizer that introduces the bridge and the solos and kind of comes back. It kind of goes out into outer space for a little bit, and it's this really cool spacey sound that Don Airey gets, which I think is really really cool. But yeah, so anyway, back to back's not a bad song. I shouldn't be too harsh on it. Really, it's decent. It lacks the heaviness, and it might be parts of it's the drum sound that drives me crazy. Let's be honest. The drum intro just bothers me because you can hear like the drums are so naked and you can hear the what I would consider to be the flaws of the production. But you can't have everything. Decent enough song. We move on to track 8 and we get "Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye." This used to be like when I first got into the album. This was my favorite one on the album. Again, I like the drums on this part because he's playing the toms for the most part. When we get the drum intro, he's doing Pacey's kind of doing like that jazzy the jazzy sort of tom groove. It's going like way back to like big band era stuff. And I think that really changes the dynamic of the song, honestly. I mean, if you played this like with a straight Bo Diddley beat, for example, which is what the music would call for. I mean, the average drummer would hear the music and would do your Bo Diddley beat. But he chooses to do this tom thing for the majority of the verses, and I think that works really really well. He alternates, so like when Gillan's singing, he's doing the tom thing, and then he kind of goes into a more traditional diddley beat after that. But yeah, it's pretty cool. I think Gillan delivers a really good vocal performance. Again, this is like later era Gillan, but he's like really really delivering those lyrics with a fervor and purpose and whatnot, which is really good. I'm not as fond of the lyrics. I mean, it borders on being a little bit preachy at times, but that's a minor complaint. On the whole, I still think it is a really really good song. Kind of there's that proggy bridge again where we get the cool like guitar line and then leads into the whole "I did a bad thing." I think that works really good. Yeah, definitely a good song. The last three, I mean, after Clearly Quite Absurd, the songs are they steadily get better and better. Well, Clearly Quite Absurd is really good. From Don't Let Go back to back, Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye, there's an ascension of good quality, I find. And that maintains actually. So yeah, Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye, a great song. Move on to the penultimate track 9. We get Junkyard Blues. This is a really cool song as well. I think Pacey delivers a really cool drum performance on here. He's never going to be as crazy as he was on a song like Burn, but he does lots of cool little rhythmic tricks, and I think Junkyard Blues is a great example of that, how he plays around with the riff a little bit. It's a fantastic riff, classic bit of Steve Morris. This is the kind of stuff you really enjoy hearing from Morris. Just really good. Just doodle doodle doo. That's it. That's got Morse's signature written all over it. And then the way Pacey plays with it again, like he kind of plays it with like a traditional backbeat, and then he starts modulating it a little bit, getting the throwing the snare drum in weird places for the first half of the riff, and he switches it depending on where the verse is at. But yeah, it's a great song. I really like the descending part that leads into the chorus. I think that works really well. Chorus I think is pretty good. Junkyard blues sound familiar. I think that's good. And then a great solo showcase as well. There's some great soloing from both Morris and Don Airey, but I like that Airey's using the piano on this song. I think the piano bits sound really good, and yeah, delivers a fantastic solo, and he certainly cements himself as the new man on the keys in this album, right? So yeah, Junkyard Blues I think works quite well. It's a great song. And then the album wraps up with track 10, Before Time Began. I've always thought of this, it's sort of linked to Rapture of the Deep. I think there is, thematically and conceptually there is definitely a link there. It starts out very, very mellow, and it's got this sort of ethereal vibe to it. It's almost, well, the very beginning is a little bit menacing. The Morse's guitar figure there has got it brings with it an air of menace, and we got Pacey doing the marching snare drum, which is then overdubbed. It kind of goes into a more traditional groove over top of the marching drum, which is quite cool, and it supplies a lot of tension for what is really a fairly dynamic and quiet intro. I really like the chords. I think the chords that Morris plays during that first verse is really good. But when we get to the middle section, that's again we're kind of right back into that proggy territory. Just trying to think of how that riff goes, because I've got Rapture the Deep is running through my head right now. If I find the lyrics, maybe it'll trigger that element in my brain. But there's a really cool complex riff that comes out of Before Time Began. That's the kind of like middle chorus bit. But you'll know that you've probably listened to the song. You probably listened to the album before I published the video, so you would know the riff I'm talking. I listened to it at work today actually. So I don't know why it's not in my mind. It's because Rapture the Deep is stuck in my mind at the moment, but. There's some really cool, very complex figures that are played by the whole band, where we get Morris, Airey, and Glover are all in unison playing this really weird kind of clunky rhythm and or clunky melody. And again, they're playing with those Eastern scales, which gives it that exotic flavor, and it's really good. Again, like this is Deep Purple does prog. This is probably the proggiest album they did in their whole career up to this point, to be totally honest. Although they do take it a step further a little bit later, but that's for another video. And yeah, I think it works really good. I think, again, Gillan could be, accused of being a little bit preachy on some of the lyrics here. I think he's trying to be very profound and spiritual with it, and he makes it work. It's not as bad as if Joe Lynn Turner tried to do a similar thing. I said I wasn't gonna make fun of Joe Lynn Turner anymore, but whoops, it happened again. One thing I find a little bit cringy is the very last line where Gillan just speaks it. For those of you who remain with your chosen gods, may your prayers be answered, or whatever. Again, he's really going for that deep, profound spiritual thing, but I don't think, like, particularly that last line. I think he makes it work for the rest of the song. The last line is just, it's like one step over the edge. But yeah, you can't blame them. They're reaching for new things, right? So he's never gonna know if it's gonna work or not unless you try the damn thing, right? So yeah, and that wraps up Rapture of the Deep, and this kind of wraps up the first little era of the Mark 8 lineup of the band. So after Rapture of the Deep, they go on. They just basically keep on touring and touring and touring. I think there's interviews with Roger Glover where they talked about how they really had no interest in recording an album at this point. Obviously, the changes to the music industry, it was a very different industry at that point, and they kind of thought, well, we can earn our living on the road. Like, you know, it costs us more money to make an album, da 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 da. But I think there was probably enough pressure, you know, from the fans to eventually continue on their recorded output. Um, I think the death of John Lord may have spurred something as well. I think I'd imagine they were probably already working on material around the time that John passed away in 2012. But the album that comes out is the follow up to Rapture the Deep. Now what does contain a couple of songs that are written in John Lord's memory, which is you know, quite fitting and touching and very good, obviously. But we'll talk more about that in the next video. I will make a brief reference to some of the bonus tracks from this era in the early 2000s. I'm not as familiar with the ones from Bananas. Bananas! But there's the well-dressed guitar, which was played live, just a classic little Morse instrumental. That was played live as far back as like the Abandon era, I'm pretty sure. I think there's a couple other bonus tracks from Bananas that I cannot conjure up, so I apologize for that. You'll write it in the comments, I'm sure. I would hope you will. But there's some bonus tracks on Rapture the Deep as well, and I think it was funny how they released it. Like the Japanese version of the album always got an extra track, and I think there was like a special edition version of the album. I think they were really trying to push. They were trying to put as much product out into the market as possible, because, you know, it's 2005, where, you know, in that era where, you know, it's pretty well been confirmed that yes, downloading is how people are going to consume music now, unless they're cool like me and you, the viewer, because I'm sure you have record collections as well. I would hope you do. But yeah, this the bonus tracks on Rapture the Deep, I think, are quite excellent, particularly the song called MTV. That's a really, really funny one. And again, it's kind of them complaining about what happened to the music industry, and they're kind of whining about classic rock radio, which, let's be honest, it's a total joke. I mean, classic rock radio is garbage. They play about 7 songs on constant repeat, and you know, they never pay. I think the song MTV is complaining. I think there was an interview, a specific interview that they did when they were promoting Bananas, and you know, they spend all this time talking about the new album and what the band is doing and how excited they are. They're on the road. They've got Don Airy. We're recording albums. We're doing all this stuff. And they're like, okay, that's great. Well, let's hear Smoke on the Water then. And then the radio just plays Smoke on the Water. It doesn't even give, you know, a fraction of a toss towards the new material. And I think, you know, a lot of these old bands kind of suffer from, you know, at least at this time. I mean, it's a free-for-all now. Nobody listens to, like, you know, everyone can just customize whatever playlist they want, right? In this day and age. But I think there was certainly a real concern in the mid 2000s about what they were going to do about, you know, making albums that were not going to get you know, promoted or anything like that. And I think by the time we get to 2013 and beyond, they realize that, you know what, they can make albums for that core fan base, and, you know, the real fans are going to go out and buy the albums, and they're going to, you know, study the albums and appreciate the albums, and hopefully go on to make rambling YouTube videos like this one about the albums. That was what they had in mind the whole time. They're like, there's going to be a guy named Brad Bridges, and he's going to ramble about Deep Purple, and he's going to go on and on and on. We need to keep making albums. And I think that's why they got Simon McBride in the band. Just kidding. I don't have that much of an ego, I don't think. Not anymore, anyway. When I was a kid, I certainly did. But yeah, that wraps up the early to mid 2000s period of the band. The next Deep Purple video I'll be doing will be I might try and squeeze 3 albums in. I'm not sure yet. We'll see how it goes. But the next pair of albums at the very least will be Now What and Infinite, which I'm looking forward to talking about. And then yeah. So as ever, if you made it this far, thank you so much for listening and watching and all the rest of it. Much appreciated. You know, I don't say this because I'm not a conformist, but please do like, share, comment, subscribe, all the rest of it. And yeah, until then, you will see me in the future. Take care. Bye-bye.